On this week's show, coronavirus. Half of what you've heard is probably wrong. And in this half hour, two experts will inoculate you against the misinformation epidemic. But first, as the world becomes a smaller place, how do we look to the rest of the world? I'm Holland Cook in Washington. This is The Big Picture on RT America. We got lots of reaction to last week's show. Rush Limbaugh even squawked about it. If you missed it, click USA Optics, where you'll find all our shows on demand at youtube.com/thebigpictureRT. This week, a quick follow-up with the benefit of a globe-trotting perspective we always try to tap into whenever he is home here in Washington. John Sitilides is principal at Trilogy Advisors here in Washington, specializing in government affairs, political communications, and geopolitical risk management. His clients include the U.S. State Department. John is a popular speaker, and you can search YouTube for his TED Talk, American Identity on the Global Stage, which lately is complicated. John, welcome back.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me, Holland.
2020 campaign coverage has been most of what's on most other cable news channels lately, and post Super Tuesday, this all goes up an octave. How closely are the USA presidential race and these characters who populate it followed elsewhere by world leaders and business people and just plain folks?
Very closely, Holland. First of all, U.S. allies and adversaries are looking to see what's going to happen with President Trump. Will he still be president in 2021 for his second inaugural, or will he be succeeded by a Democrat? And if so, which of these Democrats? The United States is still the dominant power in the world, even with the new competition with China, Russia, rogue regime issues like Iran and North Korea. People still look to the United States for global leadership. Who dominates the United States government and the U.S. economy and drives it forward is always going to be a major issue for audiences, governments, and plain folks around the world. Add to that the fact that Donald Trump is the most riveting and entertaining president in modern history.
Amen.
Yeah, and so you've got people, just everyday citizens around the world who are watching U.S. politics probably like they haven't done so in years, if not decades.
Do you reckon that world financial markets have now priced in this mercurial and often undiplomatic president's shoot-from-the-hip style?
I believe so. I mean, markets tend to be amoral, right? So whether or not people were Democrats or Republicans, and for that matter, one of the surprising facts is most people in New York in the financial and investment industries are Democrats. They supported Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. They supported Barack Obama. They're not Trump fans, but what they want more than anything else is profits that can drive a business and consumer confidence and elevate the markets. And I think that's what they've been looking at the last 3 years. We'll see how the coronavirus affects the U.S. markets as well as what's happening in the international indices. But no, I think very much so. They've priced him in. Nobody can figure out what he's going to do next, but they know it's almost always going to be surprising and unorthodox.
Yeah, a staunch conservative friend of mine says you should thank him for the number at the bottom of your 401k. I said, no, I should thank Jeff Bezos. But the president tends to benefit from or get blamed for an up or down economy, respectively, historically, right?
Absolutely. And Donald Trump has been fortunate. First of all, the larger economic conditions around the world have been largely good up until this coronavirus, and we're still uncertain as to what the impacts will be through 2020. But in the U.S., I think Donald Trump can fairly be credited for the tax cuts and for the deregulation that's driving business confidence, that's driving consumer confidence. And we have the most booming economy we've had since the mid-1990s in the United States. And much of that credit, wherever one stands on the spectrum, goes to Donald Trump and the policies he's been able to enact.
Well, about coronavirus. When coronavirus sneezes, the financial markets go down for the count. And even just moving around here domestically, I am constantly being asked, have I been to China in the last couple of weeks? Even just making appointments here in Washington. So I can only imagine the gauntlet you run in your more exotic travels. Talk to us about supply chain interruptions and other ways that this coronavirus epidemic is going to be felt in Heartland, USA.
Yeah, I think what we've seen now that the epidemic is moving out of China and we're increasingly seeing it in other Asian countries, in Europe and in the United States, is really what has the markets rattled the last week, week and a half or so. And we'll see to what extent this starts to play out more broadly inside the United States. I'd like to think that really one of the major differences we have here in the US, in Europe, and in advanced countries like Japan and South Korea is we have open governments. We share information. It's not what we had in China, where for the first 6 weeks, they kept this thing completely under wraps. And it was only in late January that General Secretary Xi Jinping announced to the Chinese people and to the world that this virus had become epidemic inside the country. So I think we have more advanced technologies. We have better information processes, and we tend to be open governmental systems so that people can respond, take right preventive measures. So I think for the most part, we're going to be in good hands. People will catch this virus, but I don't think we're going to have the type of crisis proportions that we've seen inside of China. However, the markets tend to be also based on psychology. And the more the media is driving the sense of panic and of crisis that is unfounded, the more dangerous it'll be for the economy. So we have to make sure that the information that we're exchanging is accurate, is cool, calm-headed, and based on facts, not on emotion.
All along, the Chinese transparency has been suspect because back when they were telling us dozens of people, they were quickly building 2 hospitals in 2 weeks. So we still don't know what we don't know, right?
That's correct. And unfortunately, that may have resulted in a pandemic that didn't need to take place if they had taken the right measures in the first days and the first weeks when Chinese physicians were reporting to local authorities about this virus. And instead, to protect the Communist Party's reputation and to prevent it from embarrassment before their own citizens and on the world stage, they kept it under wraps. Now they're playing catch up, but now we have this out of control potentially in Europe, in pockets of Asia, and hopefully not in the United States. But we'll see how this plays out.
We are talking with Government Affairs Advisor John Sitilides. John, the 5G evolution is a USA-China trade flashpoint. We are wary that their Huawei internet plumbing is a Trojan horse that's going to spy on us. But American tech firms and the European manufacturers we do trust are not as far along as the Huawei-powered 5G stuff. Where does this standoff go from here, other than futuristic robocars, et cetera? And what's at stake for the American consumer if we do fall behind in the 5G race?
Well, unfortunately, Holland, we are already behind in the 5G race, and that's the quandary that's posed for U.S. policymakers, from the president to the Congress to our regulatory agencies. And that is that, on the one hand, we understand the security problems of 5G, led by Huawei, ZTE, and other Chinese 5G powerhouses. They're able to offer superior hardware and software services, and they're able to undercut the competition. Mostly Ericsson out of Sweden, Nokia out of Finland, and Samsung, of course, out of South Korea, by as much as 40%. The problem that we have is that, first of all, we're concerned that the Chinese Communist Party can compel those companies, Huawei, ZTE, and others, to surrender any personal data or any corporate secrets from any customers that use Chinese 5G companies. The problem that we have is that we don't have a viable alternative like a Cisco or a Qualcomm or other 5G company that can compete with these Chinese companies. Now, Ericsson and Nokia can, and maybe we're looking at partnerships or acquisitions between US companies and European companies to be able to compete more effectively with these Chinese companies in the years to come. But the security problem is very real. We're trying to persuade more allies to be cautious about allowing 5G into their networks and potentially compromising their infrastructure, their technology systems, and even government secrets. while looking to see whether or not we can provide a realistic alternative to those successful Chinese companies.
Yeah, what's wonderful about the internet is that it is a world wide web. If you end up with two tracks, the track that's behind is behind. Brexit is reshuffling the economic deck in Europe. You got Belt and Road Initiative among various Eurasian alliances that are end-running America's influence there. Historically, much of the world economy has been priced in USA dollars. Is the greenback's status lessening? And if so, what does that mean at the kitchen table here at home?
I don't see this happening, Holland. And if anything, if you look at what's been going on with the coronavirus pandemic that's now bursting around the world, investors are looking for a safe haven. They're very concerned about the shift in global supply chains away from China into, and this was already happening before the pandemic. It was going into Southeast Asia, into India, and even into Africa, which could become the world's next great factory floor, replacing China of the last 20 years. But right now, investors are looking for a safe haven. They're a little bit unsettled about what's happening with the global economy. China may be at 0% growth for the first quarter. Its economy is basically shut down. And we'll see what the ripple effects are in the US and in the EU and in other Asian markets. So investors are seeking a safe haven. They're running to the US dollar. The dollar is actually holding steady and actually increasing a couple of basis points in the last several weeks. So I think the dollar will remain the safe haven for the foreseeable future.
That's good to know. I'm down to about a minute, but I must ask, President Trump crows about USA energy independence and has Juan Guaido take a bow at the State of the Union. If it is not because Venezuela sits atop the world's biggest oil patch, what is the administration's persistent interest in installing our guy as president there?
I don't see him as our guy. First of all, one would look at the Venezuelan constitution, and most Latin American countries have already taken the initiative in recognizing Juan Guaido as the duly elected president of Venezuela, given that there's no legitimacy left to Nicolas Maduro's dictatorial regime. But beyond that, I don't really think it's about oil, Holland. The U.S. already exports twice as much oil around the world as Venezuela does, and we're the #1 oil producer beyond Russia and Saudi Arabia. This is really about Chinese debt, about $25 billion, and the fear that China will seize Venezuelan assets. The Russian military in Venezuela, Iran's Hezbollah, destabilizing governments, and a potential humanitarian crisis of millions of people if Venezuela becomes a failed state, streaming throughout Latin America, Central America, and maybe even to the U.S.
That is a big picture. John Sitilides, Trilogy Advisors, thanks as always.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, how seriously are we taking the coronavirus epidemic?
Why would I betray you?
We all have our secrets.
The new James Bond movie, No Time to Die, will not open as planned on Easter weekend. With movie theaters closed in several countries now, 007's debut has been pushed back to November. But don't believe everything you've heard about this virus. News you can use is coming up. This is The Big Picture on RT America.